Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our final session in our conversation series. You may notice that this session is being recorded, and that is intentional because there's going to be somewhat of a summary and will give you the opportunity to have that. If you notice, I have also pinned myself, which means the focus of the recording will be on me and my slides, and you will be somewhere there in a very small box, so you don't need to feel like you are being featured. So I want to say welcome to everyone to a part of this conversation that we have been having. And I want to jump right into my presentation, and I want to jump right into the kind of conversation we have been having. So on your screen I want to take us back to how we have engaged in this learning over the last couple of months, and the intentionality behind the spacing of the learning, and that you get a time to reflect on your learning. I have to share, there's a video I posted on my social media. Many of you'll get to see it if you follow me. If not, I can send you a copy. But I had a conversation with about 11, 12 schools come together on Friday in the Halton District School Board. These were all principals that came together to pull me in for a conversation. And it was a solid conversation where we started about disrupting the status quo and what does that look like in individual schools. And there was this really bold acknowledgement, very bold realization that disrupting, that equity, that work you're doing, that inclusion will look different at different time and in different school settings and different spaces. I shared an example with a team that for years I have worked and write about 2S LGBTQI plus issues in the Caribbean. Someone mic is on. Someone mic is on. Remember to keep your mics off, and because we can hear you and you're being recorded, right? And I said to them, we had that conversation back years ago in the Caribbean about 2S LGBTQIA+. Trinidad back in a couple of years ago decriminalized, and last week in the country of Trinidad, the parliament voted to recriminalize LGBTQ homosexuality, sex. So if I go to Trinidad, I could be in prison for 5 years. I use that to start our conversation for us to understand that the different things we're talking about happens at different time, different space. You look around, you know what's going on. There are different eruptions and different ruptures at different time. And that is why being abreast of what's happening around you with your student is important. I always say it, and I'm unapologetic about this, because I've done this for years. Way before some of you got to know me, I've been doing adult education workshops. And I can tell you, there are many educators that will be like, well, I don't need anything. And I will say to those persons, very sadly, yes, we do. To be current, to be effective, we need to always retool, re-examine, and reflect. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to do a course. It means we have to come to these spaces, and in 40 minutes, we make some touch points. Sometimes I'm not going to tell you anything new. Don't you ever think that when I come to speak to a group, I am coming with such new and innovative ideas. No. Sometimes my job is just to remind you, because I can tell you from the work I have done for years, we all need a reminder. I have helped leaders to remember why they chose to lead. I have helped teachers to remember why they chose to teach. And so I'm offering that reminder. And we started on October the 7th by talking about setting the table. And I like the idea in October how we intentionally looked at this particular slide. And in October, we talked about what is it that you do at the table? Where is your power? Where is your influence? Where is your impact? And then in In November the 1st, we talk about cultivating and sustaining belonging. And we went to this slide. I have to bring back the old slide. We went to this slide. And in this slide, we were intentional talking about what are the possibilities when belonging is foundation. And I asked you a question. I remember clearly I asked the question, what does belonging look like in your school? That question still stands today. What does belonging look like in your school? What does belonging look like in your classroom? Because here's one sharp, strong truth. There are students who will feel a sense of belonging in particular classrooms, and they do not feel any of that in other spaces. So when I say to you, you have a responsibility to cultivate and create, and I use those words, and sustain a climate of belonging, it's very personal. It's very personal. It's not about the principal at this time, not about the superintendent, not about even me, the keynote speaker, the guest speaker, and the workshop provider. It's about you and your classroom. How are you navigating those spaces? How are you creating those spaces intentionally? And then we went into, in February the 14th, Valentine's Day, we had a love fest, and we talked about culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. And here is something that I want to highlight. We are going to have a conversation today, but I want you to look at the first of the three central tenets of CRRP. It says, holding high expectations for all students. I know when many people talk about CRRP, they go into frameworks, they go into cultural consciousness, they go into books and resources, they go into critical consciousness, they go into a lot of those things. And somehow we miss that the first part of the conversation of this entire work, started by Gloria Ladson-Billings, supported by many other persons like Milner, Geneva Gay, I myself is writing, it's actually on our topic today. And that brings us to our topic today, holding high expectations. No matter what you do, the books, the framework, whatever you are doing, it's only to support high expectation of our students. We want them to succeed. We want them to do well. And so that is our conversation today. But before I even show you the today's slide, the cover slide, I want to share with you a most powerful quote by Bettina Love, one amazing, amazing author that I love, and I follow her work. I use her work in my work. She said, pedagogy, regardless of its name, is useless without teachers dedicated to challenging systematic oppression with intersectional social justice. So I always tell people, you know, I like a good lesson plan, I like a good committee, I like a good plan, I like all of those things. But those things really are not the biggest thing for me. Because regardless of what you call pedagogy, if it's not challenging oppression around you, if it's not calling in and calling out, if it's not providing liberatory education, if it's not holding our students at high expectation, if it's not disrupting, then it's not doing the work. I use this slide here for a reason. I want you to know, this is what we're going to talk about today. But I know I leave this slide here for a reason. You notice there's another school name on it. That was not an error. That was not an error. I wanted to bring that forward because I had a conversation like this with another set of teachers just the other day, and it was the student well-being department. I want you to get where I'm going with this conversation about holding and supporting high expectations. And afterwards, I had the very same conversation with the entire social work and child and youth worker group at Halton District School Board. I did that for a reason because I want you to understand that before we can go into anything to do with holding high expectations, we have to be honest about why is it that we are having this conversation? Why were your principals together? Why, when we had our conversation last year, August it was, or July, Carla, that we talked about this. This is not a new conversation. So I just want you to know your principal didn't just get up out of their bed one morning and be like, you know what, let's go talk about this. This was an intentional conversation we had about the ways in which different students in our schools are seen in deficit. And I use this idea for a reason. In the background, you see suits and you see ties and you see jackets. And that is a representation of just power, nothing else. And then at the front, you see two persons, a parent and a child, a guardian and a child, an adult and a child. And down on the ground is their rationale, is their reason, is their story that has impact what the people at the back see as deficit. So I remember years ago, going to teach you my own learning. Years ago, I remember doing parent evening. Years ago, and back home, even in Jamaica and the Bahamas, we'll have parent evening or whatever. And there was this really, really strong opinion amongst teachers that the parents who don't come to none of these events are the parents who don't care about their children. That was a very popular conversation. And some of that is true. There's always a little bit of that is true. But as I matured into teaching and administration and listening to stories and hearing stories and people trusting me to share their stories, you get to really realize a lot of stuff that we make assumptions about, especially about students who are struggling, is not. I could tell you another story about a child in my class who was doing, just not engaging as I feel like they needed to. And when I realized this child was living in a shelter, I'm going to be very frank with you. I stayed back in my classroom and I got the message from my principal and we were talking about something and I cried. I cried because I felt really bad that I have been acting on assumption. That's why when we talk about bias and assumptions and stereotypes, and some of us, we free ourselves from that. Well, he's not talking about me. Yes, I am. I truly am talking about you. Because we all have our biases and we all have make certain assumptions and we have certain stereotypes in our head. The problem with that is that we act on it. So there are certain, and acting on it don't mean you're doing something negative. Let me give you what I mean by acting on it. One example, I remember giving assignments in this particular class, and I would be very clear on, because I challenged my grade 5 and 6, and I would be like, this is what you need to do, and you need to do this at home. Ask your mom and your dad, make sure you go on your tablets. I was just going with that because 36 children in front of me, and the assumption that everybody has a mom and a dad, everybody going to a great home, everybody has someone to sit with them and the luxury of sitting with them, and everybody have a tablet. Like, it's what, 2017, 16? Who don't have a tablet? Can I tell you, I learned in 2020 that there were Ontario schools that the students don't have internet at schools. And there are Ontario schools that I was asked to do workshop with online. And they would say to me, Dr. Campbell, we must record it because at any one time, many of our schools may not have internet access. So I want you to understand, when I say assumption, stereotypes, bias, it don't necessarily mean you are accusing a child or a student or a parent. It means the ways in which we have come to these conclusions. And I want you to understand, when my principal pulled me aside and said to me, this particular child in your class, Mr. Campbell, he comes from the shelter to school and from school to the shelter. That did something to me. And yes, I told you I cried. But here is what I want to make clear. After crying, then what? After the tears, what comes next? Because if all we are going to do is cry, what comes next? When we hear about Indigenous students and the land and the grave, many of us cried. But what did we do afterwards? What did we do afterwards? So I want you to understand when we come together for this courageous conversation, it's to talk about the persistence. I love that word principle, the persistence of low expectation and the deficit mentality that is evident in many of our classrooms. And talking about the bars our students face. So this is just a collage of past ideas and past opinions and past contribution that was made in face-to-face sessions with me when we talk about what are some of those things that may be impacting our students with expectations. What are some of those things within schools? And there's some words that jump out to me. Illness jumps out at me. I see down there living in foster care. I see bullying jump out at me. And I use bullying a lot in my conversation because I know what is it to be bullied in school. And I can tell you, the last thing on my mind on a Monday morning when I'm going to school is not if I did my homework, if I'm ready for school, is how I'm going to navigate these bullies today. And so my time was taken up with navigating bullying, not focusing on my high expectations that my teacher may have had for me. And so what we're going to do as we talk about deficit thinking, we're going to pivot into all in the high expectation. But I want us to just be very clear when I say deficit thinking. I want us to be clear on how it's persistent, how we see it in our school, and how it impacts our students. And I want to read this. Deficit thinking is a very common way of thinking which affects our general way of being in and constructing the world. Differences from the norm, and remember now, somebody set the norm. Sometimes systems set the norm. Sometimes policies set the norm. Sometimes race, identity set the norm. What are those norms? Differences from the norm are immediately seen as being deprived, negative, and disadvantaged. I always tell people, it's not about just saying somebody's different, but ask yourself, when you identify that person as different, what label is attached to that different? And if you check it out, it's always something less than. That's how many of us equate different. And so as we get into that, these researchers, Portelli, cited this work, and it talked about the fact that we see their students as a laundry list of problems. I have been in a staff room for 27 years. Don't forget. I know what staff room conversations can sound like. Some, of course, not at all. When we said, well, here we go again, and this one can't, and this one can't, and this one can't. So we're going to jump in our first 5 minutes breakout room. So you don't need to worry. We're just going to pause the recording. There's nothing being recorded. So you can have your conversations. Your mics are off, so I'm not hearing what you're saying. So it's not going to be captured. So don't you worry about that. But for 5 minutes, I'm going to pause all the recording, shut my camera off, or just sit here in my own reflection and working on stuff. And I want you to think about this slide that I'm putting up. Maybe some of you have seen it before. If not, we're going to reflect on it again. Oftentimes when we see deficit thinking or we talk about low expectations, our first thing is principle is, and department, I see you, phys ed, I see you, everyone. The first thing we kind of jump to is how do we fix this student? What are we going to do? And, we're going to call in our parent. We may want to call in the social worker. I am thinking we may even want to call in the SNA and the CYW. Maybe after school is necessary. Maybe a extra meeting is necessary, a one-on-one with the superintendent. Like, we need to really address this. But this is what we have neglected to do a lot, including myself, and I have been very intentional over the last couple of years, how I speak out about the system. So we are going to have a conversation. I want you to leave the fixing of the student for a bit. we're not gonna use our 5 minutes on that. Let's use our 5 minutes and talk about what is even one system within your school. One system, one process, one thing that is systematic in your school that you're thinking we really should address it. Fix may not be the best word, but we need to maybe address it. So we're not going to be addressing our students in the next 5 minutes. Let's talk about addressing that particular stuff. 5 minutes on the clock, everybody. Let's have some conversation about that. All right, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, welcome back. So we just had those conversations in our different group about the system. That's a long conversation we can have. Trust and believe, I have had that kind of conversation in workshops before with quite a bit of individuals, and we have actually spent the time to really examine systems around us. At this time, I'm going to play a video, and I want us to spend some time really listening to this video. And it's an old video, nothing new to some of you. Some of you may have seen this video before. Many of you may have not seen it before. And I want us to take some time to watch this video. And then afterwards, we're going to have a discussion. I want us to be reminded. It's an old, what I would say, I'm just bringing back something to your memory. Because like I said, sometimes a conversation like this don't need you to go wide and deep. It needs you to actually remember why you're doing what you're doing. The idea of expectation is not new. There have actually been research done on expectation. One such research, some of you have heard about it, is the Pygmalion effect. Nothing new. Some of you have studied in psychology. It still stands today. I guarantee you, if you do this experiment in your class, the results will be the same. If students feel that you sincerely have high expectations for them and that you are working in their best interest and your intention is always that you expect more of them because you think more of them and you work towards evidence in that, it will be an increase in production. That's just the reality. But a lot of us start to say, a lot of students do come disappointed on arrival. They do come discouraged on arrival. So what are we doing in our schools? So let's talk about this in a minute.
The difference, whether your teacher believes that you are a high performer or a low performer, that you are a late bloomer, that even though you haven't demonstrated your intellectual ability, you will blossom, or you're not a good student or you're a good student. Psychologist Robert Rosenthal and school principal Lenore Jacobson did a remarkable study some years ago in which they told school teachers, elementary school teachers, that on the basis of some psychological tests, some of their students, some of the children in their class were designated as late bloomers. Even though they hadn't shown any academic success, they are expected to bloom. The amazing thing is that in a very short time, the teachers began to treat those children differently than the other kids. Those kids began to think of themselves differently, and in the end, they actually performed significantly better than the other kids. They were transformed by the teacher's positive expectations, the opposite of Jane Elliott's study, in which teachers' negative expectations that the teacher infused led them to think of themselves as inferior. So let's see the Pygmalion effect in action in these classrooms set up by Rosenthal and Jacobson.
Positive expectations can change a person's perception of a situation just as dramatically as negative expectations. Psychologists call this the Pygmalion effect, after the George Bernard Shaw play of the same name, in which even an uneducated ragamuffin can be transformed into a proper society lady. In an experiment conducted at an elementary school like this one, psychologist Robert Rosenthal and school principal Lenore Jacobson took the Pygmalion effect one step further.
What we wanted to show was the extent to which teachers' expectations could actually affect pupils' intellectual performance, for example, their IQ scores. So what we did was we tested everybody in a school with a test that pretended to be a test that would predict academic blooming, so-called Harvard test of inflected acquisition, and allegedly on the basis of that test, but not really, we gave each of the teachers in the school the names of a handful of children in her classroom that would get smart in the academic year ahead. These kids' names were taken out of a hat. We chose them by means of a table of random numbers. The children themselves did not know in any direct way that teachers were holding certain expectations for them. Teachers were told not to tell the kids, and of course we didn't tell the children either. So the children never knew.
6 times something that's close to 32. Good. 6 times 5.
And then when we tested the children a year later, we found that those kids who'd been alleged to their teachers to be showing or going to show intellectual gains, in fact showed greater intellectual gains than did the children of whom we'd said nothing in particular. So the kids actually got smarter when they were expected to get smarter by their teachers. We've come to feel that there are really 4 factors that operate in the mediation or communication of.
Before we continue the video, I want you to lean into these 4 factors, and I want you to realize how we every day operate within those 4 factors. I want you to listen to those 4 factors and see how most of us as educators, we actually operate in those 4 factors every day for various reasons. Let's go.
Of these self-fulfilling prophecies, especially in the classroom, but not only in the classroom. So what are these 4 things that teachers tend to do differently to kids for whom they have more favorable expectations? The first factor is the climate factor. Teachers tend to create a warmer climate for those children for whom they have more favorable expectations. They're just nicer to them, both in terms of the things they say and also in the nonverbal channels of communication. The other very important factor is the so-called input factor. That one probably won't surprise anyone. Teachers teach more material to those kids for whom they have more favorable expectations. After all, if you think a kid is dumb and can't learn, you're not going to put yourself out to try to teach them very much. 2 other factors, though, make a difference. One is the response opportunity factor. That is, kids get more of a chance to respond if the teachers expect more of them. They call on them more often. When they do call on them, they let them talk longer, and they help and shape with them the answers that the kids speak out, kind of working together to put the response out. The last is feedback. The feedback factor works in this way. As you might expect, if more is expected of a kid, the kid is praised more, positively reinforced more for getting a good answer out. But interestingly enough, is given more differentiated feedback when they get the wrong answer. One of the ways in which you can sometimes tell a little bit that the teacher does not have very high expectations for a kid is that the teacher is willing to accept a low-quality response, or it won't really clarify what would have been a good quality response.
We can stop there. So we'll stop there. I'm going to stop sharing that, and we're going to continue. So I want you to think about those 4 factors that was just shared with us. And I want you to realize that these 4 factors, as I said before, they are not new. And these 4 factors are in operation most days at school. Most days, if not all days at school, there is a consideration about climate. If you remember, I talked to you a lot in my first 2 sessions about cultivating and sustaining a certain climate. I just published a book chapter on how administrators cultivate the climate of belonging. What is the climate within your school? There is no debate that different schools, different classrooms have different climates. There's places you walk in, you just feel that warmth. You believe you can. You believe you can. There's something about a teacher that allows children and students to know they can. There is something about a teacher that says to students, I see the possibilities. There's something about our teacher teaches with a strength-based approach versus a deficit approach. There is something about a teacher who every time a problem is presented, they will say, well, maybe we could try this. I'm going to do this. Send it one more time. Let's do this over again. Write it over. There's something about that. How we move from the deficit to the strength-based approach. There is something about the input factor. Many of us, if not all of us, as the researcher says, will put so much in if we know that our students can. Look at sports. Look how we input and the kind of effort that goes into teams that are doing well. Think about if a team that is losing, a team that has never won, would get even half sometimes of what certain winning team gets. I made a statement the other day, and a lot of people really, it resonated with them. It was a strong statement I made last week, Friday. I talked about teaching in a school in Jamaica years ago, 1995 to be exact, where we had 6 of each class. 6 of each class. So we have class A, B, C, D, E, F. Grade 1A, grade B, same thing, right across. Streaming. It's not new, you know. Some of you still streaming your work, although we're not streaming anymore. The thing that no teacher denied in that conversation was this. The children who were in, for instance, grade 7 or grade 9A or 6A or 5A, they knew it. You don't have to tell them. They knew they were the A class in the school. They knew they were the A class. They was the one called to the mic. They were on every committee. They were the student counselors. Their teacher was very much most time the teacher of the year. There were just certain elements that happened in that school that allowed parents, staff, and students to know you were in the A class. And here is the honest truth. There were just certain things that happened in that school that allowed the ones in grade 6F or grade 7F to know they were grade 7F. And here is something that many of us don't want to admit, but this is a fact. And I will go there because it's about self-examination. Many times those classes in grade 6F or grade 7F or grade 1F got the teacher also who did not care to teach. That's a heavy one, and I'm unapologetic because we have seen that for years, that the teacher, these children will be given a teacher who you just feel like this teacher is just waiting to go home. She has 5 more years. She's not teaching. She didn't care less. He doesn't care less. He's rough. He's this. Let's give him the worst class in the building. How are we supporting students? And we want to hold high expectations. Here is a quote I have there. If we continue, keep them in the night. And then justice is telling them they are stars without acknowledging the night that surrounds them. And that's by Donovan Livingstone, Harvard 2016. We have to be honest about the night. A lot of times I know people like my workshop. What they don't like is when it gets honest. We talked about this long ago. People said, oh, I was uncomfortable. Uncomfortable about what? What were you uncomfortable about? Whenever we have conversations about race and homophobia and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and hate and hurt and bullying, we talk about the ways in which students are disenfranchised and ways in which people are excluded, and we talk about anti-Black racism. We talk about these things. There are people who, well, I'm uncomfortable. What are you uncomfortable with? Listening to someone's life that has been traumatic? When you and I, we sit in positions of power and authority, when we sit in what, African people call sit in the softness, and we are affected by that. So I want you to really think about strength-based approaches. And as we get into this, I want to share this with you. We won't do an activity. We don't have time for that. But what I used to have this conversation, what I would do is share a deficit scenario and ask us as educators, what could be a possible strength-based approach? So let me share a very popular example I use with you. And I won't say much because we are recording. There was a particular school in a particular board that did an entire series of workshops with me. And this particular deficit thinking really, really impacted the principal. And we had a conversation and she said, this is happening a lot. She sees it a lot. It's affect her a lot. The conversation she has with certain teachers, and we want to really chisel down to the core. And one of the big things we look at was the report cards. I'm going to let you know what I did. So we got report cards in the school that have been sent to, years. And we copied a lot of the paragraph that they culminate in conversation paragraph. And we put them on, on a document. And we said to the teachers, let's look at these report cards feedback. And the consensus was, wow, the language. The language. Then the principal says, every one of these report card comes from this particular school. So she was saying, teachers, these are your report cards. She took some from 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever. These are your report cards. The language, and that's why when I wrote in my book about high expectation, we talk about the language of hope. And so what they did, which an amazing activity we did at that school, we looked at all the conversation, and we had to rewrite the comments. We didn't rewrite the comments in hypocrisy. Don't get me wrong. If a child is disruptive, we are going to say that. But it was the language that was used and the suggestions that were used and the ways in which we are asking for next steps. What are we going to do with this? Telling a parent your child is constantly disruptive. Okay, so what are we going to do? Because the child is coming back next year, September. The child is not gone. He's coming back. She's coming back. They are coming back in September. So what is that next step we're talking about? What is the possibility that we're talking about? And so as we talk about holding high expectations, I want to leave you all with a couple reminders. The first one I want to leave you with is we have to work at identifying and removing some of the barriers. A lot of times when our students are not exerting the kind of excellence we want, they are not owning the learning like we want, let us think about, are there barriers? Now, I've taught for years, remember. So I know there are certain students, it's gonna be, we're not gonna reach everybody, we're not gonna be perfect, but we have ways to go and ways to grow. I want you to write that down. We have ways to go and ways to grow. Show me a teacher who has been very reflective about their practice, and I show you a great teacher. I have made mistakes. I have maybe given less. Ask yourself, what are those barriers that are in our classroom that we need to identify and remove? We have had the long conversation about students coming to school hungry. We have had a long conversation about students who were held in office because they were late. A child is late, we're going to keep them in the office for 1 hour to miss 2 classes because they're late. I don't know the rationale behind that. But that was old school. I don't know if people are still doing that, but we have done that. I used to be a part of that old school action. So how are we making sure we are not blaming our students for the darkness that surrounds them? How are we seeing our students? Action number 2, as individuals. You have seen this before. You know the negativity that surrounds an IEP. I don't know when we're going to get there. I do hope we're going to get there. I do feel like we will get there. where we do not see a student with a IEP and a student who is on accommodation as a burden. There's something even at the university level. We have students on accommodation, and there's student who is on accommodation that people immediately receive as a burden. I have had students on accommodation and they are always A+. They have certain illness. They need time. They need to stand up and walk out. When I do workshops, I remember years ago, somebody get up out of a workshop and go stand outside. It was almost like they're being rude. And we came from a place where people was afraid to say, well, I want to stand at the back because my tailbone hurts when I sit this long, or I can't sit this long, or I am having cramps, I need to stand, or I need to walk at the back, or I need to sip my water every 5 minutes, or something like that. I want to let you know, principal, I come from old school where some of these things were no. Sit yourself down and don't move. It's not walking time until I had to unlearn that myself. So now I say to my students, if you need to get up, you can get up. You need to go to the back, you can go to the back. If you need to go outside quickly and come back. Those things are now normal for me. They weren't, because we took it personal that a child was distracted. I remember how I spoke to students who had a certain a hoodie on. Like, was a big no. Until we realize certain things. So I want us to know that we have to see our students as individuals and how to work at that. And yes, it is a little bit more work. It is a little bit more work. It is a little bit more work. And IEP documentation is a little bit more work. But forget the documentation. What about the teaching and the attention? What about giving that child a little bit more? How do we do that? The next one is establish high expectations. Do you know there are students, and students have said this, their researchers, students have said this, that they don't know what is expected of them with certain teachers. They'll be like, oh, he says this and he says that, but we don't know what it really means. Are we clear on our expectations? I remember in the elementary school, I don't know about the high school, when we had to write down the expectations and the outcome and what we want. And we got into rubrics. We talk about rubrics a lot. We kind of calm it down now. And we talk about what does an A paper look like and a B paper look like. We establish the expectation. If you're going to get an A, it needs to look like this, with that, with that, with that, with that. That's what an A look like. How are we establishing those high expectations? But not just saying that is what it looks like. You also say, here is what it looks like in my class when I engage with you. Here's what I am going to do. Here's how I am going to show up. So the next thing we ask about is, now that we have established the high expectation, are we holding our students to the high expectation? What does that mean? For me, it's a constant reminder, and it's a language of hope. If you ask me one thing that is important that we sometimes forget, it is the language of hope. I am going to a meeting next week to talk to an entire school leadership team about the language of hope. That is what they requested. So I know what I'm talking about when I say it's not happening, because this particular space says we need to talk about the language of hope, because the language of deficit is rampant in our space. We have gotten to the point where we make jokes about students in deficit. Let's be honest about it. It's a joke. I've seen that. I've seen it. I always say to people, and I share to you very personal about myself, when I came to Canada, and we used to have this joke. I came to Canada 2008, and there was this conversation about showing up on Jamaican time or Caribbean time. I remember telling people, don't do that with me. I don't do Caribbean time. The moment you think I'm going to show up on Caribbean time, you're actually saying to me, Andrew, you're always going to be late, and I don't expect you to be on time. If I think you're going to be late all the time, principal, and I don't expect you to be here on time, John, I'm not giving you any kind of responsibility to be here on time. I want you to think about that. So when we make jokes and think it's cute, I tell people, well, no, I don't want to be a part of your joke with that. Because if I am a keynote speaker, nobody's going to expect me to show up on Caribbean time. They're expecting me to show up on your time. When I'm online, I log in 5 and 10 minutes before my speaking time. I have done 15, I have done 20. If I come late every time you want me to do something, you will not use me. So as much as you may be saying, oh, I'm going to ignore Dr. ABC, you are actually acting on it because you now have decided that I am constantly late. You have now held me in deficit, rightfully so, and you're not going to give me opportunities. Who wants a speaker who is always late? I don't. I don't know about you, John or Carla, but I don't. So how are we holding our students to the high expectation? How are we constantly reminding them like a broken clock? I did say that because some of us have to do it like a broken clock. Continue reminding them that this is what we require. And if everybody in the school would do that, and it's a constant reminder, they would realize, well, nobody in this school is going to expect me to do mediocre because nobody's happy with mediocre here. This is not the school where people are okay with me doing foolishness. Yes, wonderful. And so, in wrapping up, I see the time. She said 5 minutes. I'm taking 4. In wrapping up, I have the same 3 slides, but I want you to see the color change that is happening. Support the high expectation. So we said we're going to establish, we're going to hold, and we're going to support. And I want you to support that with your planning. Plan with that level of expectation. I want you to support that with your pedagogy. Teach to that high expectation. Don't lower your quality of what you can do because we know you can do. But I know some of us will say, well, they're not doing nothing, so I'm not going to even bother pull out the stunt. Pull out the stunts. Let them be in awe. Let even that one who you know, not even trying to look at you, let them be in awe at what just happened in class today, at the activity, at the conversation, at your slides and your PowerPoint, at how they feel that you prepared for them. And the last one, as I said, focus on your planning, focus on your pedagogy, and focus on your everyday classroom practices. I was intentional with the pictures in this one. The smile, the contact, the energy, the vibe, the speaking. You can ask me. I'm not an expert, but I'm pretty much close to having a whole lot of knowledge when it comes to energy and how you show up. I can show you tons of emails. I have so many emails where people will say, thank you, Dr. Campbell, for your speaking, for your this, for your that, for the conference. I've gotten it from many places. Internet, I've gotten it. I can give myself a pat on the shoulder for that. But they always add to those emails come with a particular thank you. And if you talk about my energy, my smile, my care, my joy, they don't need to debate on my content. I got that covered. They know I got that covered. But the way I season my lectures and my presentations and my thing with joy and season it with some good motivation and sprinkle it with some good sauce of care, that is what they have seen. So I'm going to leave you with that. And the last one is the language of hope, like I said before. I'm going to leave you with this. It's my final slide. And as we're thinking about expectation, let us be mindful of our planning, our language, our practices, and just the vibe, the language of hope and the vibe with which we bring to the classroom spaces. Thank you so much for having me, for listening. We have recorded this. This is for you. I'll be downloading it. sending it to you, to the principal, so they can share to you as a reminder. We can unpack it in a staff meeting by yourself when you are ready. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Over to you, principal, to tell it's John or it's Carla to tell your team thanks as well.
John, would you like to say a couple of words?
Yeah. Dr. ABC, on behalf of Jill Roberts and our team, I just want to thank you for all of these sessions. Lots to think about these sessions. And like you said earlier, lots of reminders, right? Like it's some of the things that maybe we know already, but just to bring it back and to really have some conscious thinking about that has certainly been something that we've been talking about here. So thank you.
Enough
And thank you. And on behalf of Eastdale, I want to say a big thank you and shout out for all of your work with us over the last 8 months or so. Really, again, the idea of those reminders, but I think that deficit thinking, right? We oftentimes we know that the brain is hardwired for that negative kind of reinforcement, and so where we can find those opportunities to shift our thinking is really important. And thank you for providing us that opportunity to do so, and especially given all of the things that we have at each of our schools as priority schools, but also that are going on in the world, that whole idea of the language for hope. So thank you very much on behalf of all of us here.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.